what you're really adding to the conversation in that country, which is so important, and not just in the UK, but globally, is that that's not enough. We can't just say, okay, you've turned 45, 50, go on this dose, this patch, this progesterone. That's all useful, but it's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation. Hi, and welcome back, everyone, to the Integrative Women's Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Jessica Drummond, your host. Okay, today I have a juicy one for you. This episode is with Pamela Windle. She is a women's health coach. I want you to watch for in this episode the work that she is doing to actually change the UK's governmental policy on menopause and how menopause in the workplace is changing, not even just menopause, but also menstrual health. Pamela is out there talking to men leaders of top global companies and talking with them about exactly how to support the women in their companies who are struggling with the menopause transition or even just menstrual health issues to retain them as employees, which is a huge goal of these large global international companies. So keep your eyes on that and be inspired, and stay tuned to the very end where I'm going to give you my key takeaway from our conversation. Enjoy. Hi, Pamela. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here joining us and giving us this opportunity to really hear about your story and your practice, because I know you're doing extremely innovative things around perimenopause and menopause in the workplace in the UK. And so, first of all, welcome. And I would love to hear the backstory of why you even thought about this career transition in the first place. How did that come about?
Wow. I mean, I really didn't think about it, to be honest. I hadn't heard of, at that point, I hadn't heard of women's health coaching, nothing specifically around women's health. So, with a background of personal training, I was under the assumption that everybody was the same.
Yes.
And yeah, and everything that I learned around personal training and the nutrition that goes alongside with that, there was this one size fits all, and that was it.
Yeah. And so once you dove into learning about the variability, if you will, among women and women, within women too, there are different phases of women's life and health. What was most interesting to you? Why did you decide to go down the path of working in perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah, so at the point that I discovered you was 2015. And I then took up a course that you were a teacher in that course, which was Jenny Borrow's course, wasn't it? And I hadn't heard of perimenopause. All I'd heard of was menopause. And so doing that course was a real eye opener. And I'd just come out of university a few years before, so I was really much of a goldfish bowl, so open to learning new things all the time. And so it just blew my mind, really, in terms of the information that I learned about perimenopause. I'm thinking, hold on, weren't we told that when you reach the menopause, obviously you're old,
Right?
yeah,
Yes.
old and past it, and the only thing that you struggled with was hot flushes and weight gain. So I was aware of weight gain and aware of hot flushes, and dryness, so vaginal dryness. I was aware of those three things, but that was it. And so what I learned in that course, so actually there were so many solutions that women could do, from a nutrition standpoint, from lifestyle, supplements as well. And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, hold on, the world needs to know about this. And so yeah, that was literally the start of my journey in terms of understanding that women need something else. And this I think it's brainwashing, I say, that we've all been led to believe that we are all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you really started your whole career journey in health and fitness and hypnotherapy much later in life. And so how did that inform your decision to join the women's health coach certification? You had you made a lot of changes really rapidly, but later in life in your 40s.
Yeah, so there was a build up to
Mm-hmm.
it. So I trained as a personal trainer early 2002 or something like that. So
Okay.
quite a while ago.
Okay.
And I'd been teaching classes and everything. But it wasn't until I wanted more. And then I went to university and did psychology and a sports science degree
Mm-hmm.
at 40 years old. So that was a real transformation in terms of my self belief and also in the direction of where I wanted to be as I aged. So the transition into a women's health coach really, I'd say it was very natural because at the time when I met you, this is in 2016, I
Mm-hmm.
think it was in March in London.
Yeah.
And so I was already on your mailing list and I was receiving your emails and I was really curious because I'd never heard the terminology functional medicine, functional nutrition, targeted supplements. I'd heard of coaching, and I'd done a previous coaching qualification myself before. But at that point, I was sick myself, and I'd been sick for a long time. At that point, I think it was 2014, no, 2012, sorry, is when I became unwell originally. But by the time I met you in 2016, I was really poorly, really struggling with fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
chronic fatigue, and I'd lost my job and everything. And so, as I was learning about the nutrition side of things from the previous course I did,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of realized actually there was something missing. There's something that I didn't know about that I needed to learn. And so it was a no-brainer. As I was meeting you in real life was just great. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. I remember that event from 2016 because it was the first time I had even met Jenny Burrell, who invited me to come speak at the conference. And it was so unexpected. It's the first time I'd ever been to the UK, maybe even Europe. Although, no, I did go to Europe once on my honeymoon before that, which was years before that. But it was I was in I was in a place too where I was learning so many things and I was so excited to share it with literally anyone that I was getting on a plane every other week and just talking to anyone who would listen. But what I loved about the audience in the UK is that it was very new in the United States, but it was even newer in the UK. And yet intuitively, it wasn't a conversation that anyone was having around hormones and natural approaches to it. And because I think of your medical system and you have some experience working in the NHS, everything is very protocoled and regimented. And as you said, like you didn't even know there was a difference between men and women, never mind a difference between one woman to another woman. And so it was such a great conversation among myself and everyone at that event because there was this change from a perspective of everyone gets the same thing, which on one hand there's a lot of value in that compared to what we have in the US because some people get amazing things and a lot of people get nothing, which is also bad.
Mm.
But everyone getting the same thing isn't optimal either. So talk about how that transformed your experience from being inside of the NHS to what your perspective was at that moment.
Yeah. So I was sick. And I'd been sick for a long time. So I'd gone through the medical system, blood tests, everything's normal, your hormones normal, we've checked your cortisol. Some people are just like this,
Yeah.
Or I was offered, antidepressants. And when I decided, and I said no, I was like, kind of please yourself then. And I guess I was curious. And I was curious about why.
Yeah.
Why am I sick? What's going on? Everything that I was doing, that I thought I was doing right, wasn't working. And I really couldn't understand why I felt the way I felt. So, meeting you in person really was just the perfect thing, really. And I really believe in, how things are brought to us when we are open and when we're searching for answers. And so meeting you in London was fantastic. And then I was already on your mailing list, and I remember thinking I'd already knew about your course.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, receiving about women's health qualification, but meeting you was the icing on the cake, I think, in person. And then I was in that. It was a really difficult decision
Yeah.
because financially I was really struggling because I was sick and I wasn't earning an income, and I'd sold my home to live off, my equity from a house. And at that point, I remember having 10 grand left in the bank account. And, I think the course, what I purchased at the time was half of that. And I just knew that there's something inside me that I needed to do, because the medical system was basically saying, this is how you are. It's likely to get worse. You're likely to develop fibromyalgia. We don't have a solution for you. And this is just the way you are now.
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to accept that. And I remember like filling in, I think I had to apply for the
Mm-hmm,
course,
mm-hmm.
I think I remember. And that was accepted. And then I remember putting my bank details in, like really fearful about, committing to something and financially. And I remember I didn't tell anyone, didn't tell my partner, my daughter, my sister, no one, because they would think I was absolutely insane.
Yes. Yes. And on paper, I can understand why. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when the email pinged back and it said, "Congratulations, the cohort that you belong to is May the 5th," and it was 2016. I remember thinking, it just really hit me. Oh my gosh, like that date, which was significant because that was the day my father passed away in 2014. And I just knew that was a sign. Uh, it was a sign that I was doing the right thing. And, Jessica, if I hadn't done that course, I have no idea what I would be today. I really don't, because for many reasons, but just from my own health journey, I would be sicker because, as you know, fatigue is the iceberg of disease, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I would be sicker, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really vulnerable because you were in such a vulnerable position. You were financially strapped, you were physically really unwell. You kind of tried all the normal stuff for 4 years at that point. So it was a big leap of faith that you took. And I really take to heart how much you trusted me and, how that in person experience made such a difference. And also just, being there with, I think now we have so many people who've shared their experiences, because I've taught this program now since around 2006, 2009 in various forms. But at that time, it was mostly in person. So I didn't have as big of a reach. Now, we have a lot of people singing the praises of the experience, and it's a bigger thing you can trust. But I think you took a big leap of faith, and I really honor that and appreciate that. And I do think that it's so common. So anyone who's listening, like the same exact thing happened for me, really. If you're going to change the normal status quo, you have to take these risks. And you're often asked to take them at a time in your life when you feel the most vulnerable, and you actually are the most vulnerable. But then let's talk about what happened from there, because the same thing, I feel the exact same way. If I had not changed my life when I was so, so sick and, learned how to do all of this and spent a lot of time and money, turning the mirror on myself and implementing that, there's no way I would even, I can't even imagine how sick I would be. And so I
Mm.
think what I love to then see is then what were some of the milestones in your journey that the program specifically supported you to either celebrate or overcome?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking 2016 and nobody was talking about the things that you were talking about in the UK. And so, as you said at the beginning, the UK was so behind. And so, when I went to my GP in 2018 and said, "Can you amend my medical records to say that I'm now don't have chronic fatigue
Mm.
syndrome?" She said, "Oh, well, what did you do?" And I just thought, "Oh boy, how am I going to explain this one?" So I did tell her, essentially it was healing my gut and support my liver, the nervous system, and it kind of washed over her head. But now things are shifting in the UK a lot. So initially, I say the thing that I needed to overcome was being well. I think I didn't qualify until 2018, I think. So even when I started, 2016,
Hmm.
I think by the time I finished, because it was like two parts, I think it was like 2018. And so part of that was me getting well and becoming your patient as well in that time. So that 10 grand stretched quite a lot.
It did. It did.
Um, it did, but it was worth every penny, and I would do it again and again and again and again if I had to. Um, and so, yeah, so initially it was definitely getting better myself.
Mhm.
And then also, so because in the UK it was so extreme in terms of the conversation around this broader conversation around the menopause, talking about gut health, gut microbiome, liver health, the HPA access, nobody was talking about that. All this personalized health coaching,
Mhm.
holding your hand and supporting women in a really different way. And nobody was talking about it. So it was really, really challenging,
Yeah.
from a work perspective.
Hmm.
And people just didn't believe. I felt that people didn't believe what I was saying, even though, if you go back on, if you look on my
Hmm.
website, there's blogs after blogs after blogs talking about this stuff. And people just didn't believe it.
Yeah.
So where we are today, 2024, GP doctors are now training in functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, and they're almost paving the way for someone like me to be more open. And there's certain things I felt like I couldn't say,
Mm.
the fear of being judged, particularly around, the toxicity.
Mm.
And as you talk about that bucket, you know, overflowing and overwhelmed with toxicity, only now I feel very comfortable about talking about that.
Yeah. And so you eventually opened a practice based on initially first just inspired by your own healing and trying to share these tools, even though it was a bit of an uphill climb at first, because as you said, people weren't thinking that these kinds of things would matter. They didn't think it would do anything. They didn't think it would impact. And so, and as you said, they didn't even really understand it. Like your GP was kind of just like, okay, well, write this in your chart. So now you're trying to start a practice, which was challenging at first. But then, in the last few years, you've really started to make a name for yourself by very deliberately, sharing your perspective on this menopause transition, especially for people who are disabled or underserved, which you really were. Like at one point in your mid 40s, you were very, very fatigued, which is a level of invisible disability. And so I think you have some really good insight into how it feels to not be able to do absolutely everything that even the new medicine, if you will. So, talk about your innovations around supporting everyone in the UK who's struggling with menopause, how you went about that.
Yeah, and I guess I think about why I'm doing it,
Hmm.
because obviously I'm perimenopause,
Hmm.
and so whilst I've done several qualifications and still learning, it's not just about other women; it's also about myself and longevity and how I see myself in the future. as I age in, in the last 8, 9 years since we've been doing this. And the conversation in the UK is growing momentum and it's fantastic. However, it's very narrow in the conversation. It's very much a white middle class woman who has resources
Mm-hmm.
to help her have an easier journey. And even the conversation around menopause, yes, people say it's every woman has a unique journey, but even that conversation is very narrow. They don't take into account the challenges that she's faced the whole of her life. As we're doing an intake about, a client that sits in front of you, we don't see her as a woman 45. We see the whole of her lifespan and mothers, and how that's influenced her
Right.
and where she is today. So for me, in terms of raising awareness around women's health in the UK currently, is one in the workplace, because the workplace is where she spends most of her time. And as we know, women are leaving
Yeah.
the workplace because they don't understand themselves, have lost sight of themselves due to the transition into menopause when they're really unaware of it. So, mid 30s, maybe
Yeah.
even early 40s. And so the workplace has a responsibility to ensure that the women in their workplaces and organizations have the right tools and the resources to remain in work. So that's one. And then, I really believe that women need to become their own health advocates. They have to.
Yeah.
So educating women about the hormones, the toxicity, the accepting, well, actually, I have got fatigue and this is what I can do. As we talk about health, is like health is a continuum, isn't it? And what is optimal health and what does that mean to you? And as you talk about, is that vision, like what is her vision and what can she have today rather than waiting for this perfect health, whatever that looks like, and it's step by step. And the women's health assessment, I use that all the time with my clients. I love it. I even do it myself
Yeah.
as well.
Great. Great.
Yeah, it's so good. And it just opens up a fantastic conversation around the topics when you're working with women on one to one and they learn things about themselves, things that are holding them back, maybe, or things that we can celebrate as well. And I think for me, it's about ensuring that women really understand themselves and not just this medical menopause that everybody's talking about, but really in depth, really broad and wider than the conversations that we're having today.
I think that's so important because, one thing that in a way the UK is really leading on a conversation around menopause in the workplace because there's an economic driver, right? They want to keep women in, their 50s and longer staying in management roles, staying in with companies. But as you said, that conversation then keeps the focus on mostly educated white upper class to middle class women. And, not everyone has access to that level of resources. And then the second thing, though, is again, the UK has been somewhat of a leader on distributing, if you will, hormone replacement therapy. But it's been, again, very structured, one size fits all. This is the evidence. Everyone should do well with this. Whereas I think what you're really adding to the conversation in that country, which is so important, and not just in the UK, but globally, is that that's not enough. We can't just say, okay, you've turned 45, 50, go on this dose, this patch, this progesterone, bioidentical progesterone, whatever. That's all useful, but it's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation. And you're now bringing this, looking at women's, and as we talk about in the women's health assessment, like What sense of purpose do they feel? What are their beliefs about themselves? And I just think that the work you're doing is so groundbreaking because you're having these conversations with upper level management in major global corporations who, I mean, what are their reactions? Like, they haven't ever thought about this, right? Because most of them are men.
Sadly, most of them are men,
Yes.
but even the women that I speak to, because this narrative around the menopause is so narrow, when I speak, they are mostly like surprised and they're like, oh, we've never heard it spoke about like this,
Yeah.
and they do want more. And it almost is as if um, it ticks rings many bells,
Mm.
as I'm speaking. It's like, yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I'm talking in a much different way. And, as we talked about when I first met you in 2016
Mhm.
or, did the course in 2015, and how the struggles around just talking about perimenopause,
Yeah.
like, hello, there's this earlier bit before we get to menopause. Now that market or that conversation is saturated.
Mhm. Mhm.
You can Google all sorts of stuff, but the way I'm speaking about it, this is another level,
It is.
and that is because I'm continuing my education um, through you,
Well,
essentially.
thank you. And I think, let's talk about that just briefly. It's not just about taking one coaching, certification and checking it off, right? We do get one of the things that people struggle with when they start to join our health coaching certification or another one of our programs is we're not the least expensive. And I do that deliberately. We revisit that all the time, but I do that deliberately because I want to pay a highly skilled team of master coaches who are really good coaches, really compassionate people, very well experienced to guide people through that program. And then we give continuing support. So we've created our alumni association. We've created the perimenopause and menopause certificate, the longevity certificate, which is our advanced menopause program. So we have the capacity to follow people. And what I love about you and so many in your class, if you will, of people who started in the women's health coach certification back in, 2012, 2014, 2016, it's now 2024 and you're still a part of the community. And not only are you learning though, you're also showing up still actively in the calls, you're answering questions on Facebook, you're giving that feedback. So our community has these like elders in it now. And how is that from your perspective? How was it in the beginning just to have that support? And how is it now being one of the elders, if you don't mind me calling you that?
No, I've earned it.
You
Thank you.
have. You absolutely have.
Well, I mean, it's yeah, I'm just taking that in really because I remember being in awe, of those elders, being able to answer questions and see things, and thinking, oh wow, curious part of me, I want to be like that. I want to be able to speak like that around this topic. And so, yeah, I mean, the fact that I think it's coming up to 9 years now,
Yeah.
which is a lot of time has gone past, a lot of learning. And I've done, the perimenopausal certification in the middle of the longevity course as well. And, I feel very grateful. I feel very grateful for the knowledge that I have. And I'm it's exciting, and I really feel that, you know, the medical system needs a lot of catching up, and the government here in the UK, are making promises around women's health in
Mhm.
general and also in the workplace. But I still feel it's not enough, and I really feel that as I'm sharing my wisdom and my knowledge across social platforms, the women that are in my community, the women that I work with on a one-to-one,
Mhm.
or in groups even.
Mhm.
This is a political stance. I really believe that it is because women's health has been neglected for so long. and marginalized women, especially, health been neglected for so long. And so, it's something that's going to grow and is growing, and Pandora is out of her box.
Yeah, absolutely. And so having that support so that for years and years and years, you can keep growing. And I want you to brag briefly about your work with the UK government and the grant you've just been given and some of your really profound speaking opportunities, because your voice is creating that pathway for underserved and ignored women to literally have better lives. So share that with us a little bit.
Yeah. Well, in 2022, I was a I was asked to be part of the British Standard Institute. So that was incredible. Around an advisor around a document that was for employers to have some, good tools and guidance for menstruation and menopause in the workplace. So that was really exciting, and that is going to be global soon as well. So that's really exciting. And then also for this year, so myself and other people have been given a grant to really shine the light on women and people
Hmm.
who menstruate and are in the menopause phase. So that's Black and brown women,
Hmm.
transgender.
LBGT plus. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, yeah, okay. And then also people with disabilities as well.
Yeah.
So because of the story that we see on social media, which is a really powerful platform, is healthy, well, not healthy, but abled people,
Yeah. Yeah.
abled white, generally white women. And so so we've been given a grant to support those women, which is really exciting. How it rolls out this year, you know, basically the landscape is going to look different for 18th of October. So International Menopause Day is going to be a very different landscape to previous years. It's going to be colourful and diverse.
That's amazing. And it's so important. It really is. So I really appreciate the work that you've done over the past 9 years. And I want to honor the fact that, because I think this is so many people's journey, I really want to honor the fact that you have to do it for and with yourself and your own
Mm.
community and the community that, get, pull the support from us. That's why we created this as a community with skilled coaches, with the skilled faculty, with a really strong student population. As you said, you have to apply, you have to speak, we have to accept you into this community at some level, in simply just because of your preparedness so that you'll be able to take advantage of these opportunities. But you've done that and you've invested over time, and now the rewards are greater and greater. So I want to end with two things. So what we're going to be doing is I'm collecting a few questions to be asking the colleagues and peers and professionals that come on this podcast in the next few episodes. But if you could ask a different peer or colleague from me one question about your practice or your work right now, what would you ask them?
Would that be advice
Yeah,
or just a question?
advice, insight, anything.
I would think I would ask for you to do an inventory on everything that I do, I think, in terms of my clinic
Mm,
and how that's how am I really serving people? Some really honest feedback, from somebody that I respect would be good. So being vulnerable to learn from the work that I'm doing.
yeah. So, like having a colleague really essentially assess the structure of your practice and being vulnerable and open to willingness to take in that feedback and decide if it's useful to you. That's great. And then if you were to be speaking to a colleague who maybe is a couple years behind you, what is
Yeah.
one piece of advice you would impart?
I would say just take your time to digest everything that you're learning. There's no rush. And also to just focus on one thing. There's a lot of information. There's what you teach us.
Yeah,
There's a
there's a
lot.
lot. I know. I'm a fire hose.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and
But take your time.
yeah.
Take your time and decide on one thing that you're going to focus on, and keep coming back to the calls. On the calls, on our weekly calls, I still learn. I'm listening to the conversations you have with other people, and I'm still learning, which is incredible. There's always some notes that, that's interesting, or I can ask you a question about something. So keep coming back and just take your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your journey. I'm so glad to see how vibrantly healthy you are 10 years later and all the amazing work that you're doing around the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.